podcast. We have an exciting guest for you this afternoon. Satya Krishnaswamy is a seasoned executive entrepreneur, product strategist, and the chief customer officer at Typeface, a premier AI marketing orchestration platform backed by Lightspeed, GV, and Salesforce Ventures, with over 25 years of experience bridging deep product management and enterprise go-to-market execution. Satya has dedicated his career to scaling world-class customer success architectures. Prior to joining Typeface, he was a pivotal executive leader at Adobe, serving as the first VP of enterprise engagement and the principal strategist for Adobe Firefly Enterprises, Adobe's new AI generative tools, where he spearheaded major commercial rollouts for the generative AI systems. His extensive background also includes building enterprise content and digital platform frameworks at Contentful and SAP, as well as advising numerous high-growth startups. At Typeface, Satya partners directly with global CMOs and enterprise digital leaders to shift corporate generative AI from a tool in isolated experimentation into a deeply governed cross-channel optimization engine. Satya, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you spending some time with us in the audience today.
Thanks, Dylan, for having me. Nice to be here.
So I know I gave a little bit of a bio there, but maybe you can contextualize it for us a little bit. Where'd you grow up? What'd you study? And how'd you get into the tech and specifically the generative AI space that everybody's so excited about these days?
That's a long story, so I'll try and keep it as short as I can.
Sure.
Grew up in India, educated in India, and then started my sort of enterprise software career in Singapore, where I was with SAP in the very early days of enterprise resource planning in Asia Pacific with ERP. And I was in the field then, led their pre-sales team, led many implementations across enterprises in Asia Pac, and then moved across to the Bay Area, was with SAP for a few more years where I moved into product management and design thinking. And then I had my own startup for 5 years. And with many scars on my back, I then joined Adobe, where I worked on a variety of marketing products from a product management perspective and built out a personalization platform for them. And then decided that it was time to sort of try out new experiments and moved to Berlin for a stint with Contentful. Moved back to the Bay Area to rejoin Adobe, where I led the Firefly Enterprise team, as you mentioned. And then in November of last year, I decided to join Typeface, which is where I am. I primarily framed my career initially as working on exciting challenges for businesses, typically enterprises. And what has ultimately ended up happening as a pattern is where I found the sweet spot is helping businesses and enterprises specifically understand how to adapt new technologies, whether it is ERP or customer relationship management, CRM, marketing automation, and now Gen AI, in order to solve really gnarly problems through the use of technology. So that's what the common thread has been across all the different roles that I've held.
Love it. So for those that might not be familiar with Typeface, maybe you can give us a bit of an elevator pitch. And what was it that was exciting enough about the role to leave a behemoth like Adobe during the height of their generative AI rollout? Obviously, Adobe being the leader in creative enterprise tools, that was probably a pretty safe place to hang out and ride the roller coaster. But be curious what led you to wanting to join Typeface, and tell us a little bit to the audience about what Typeface does and where they sit in the generative AI ecosystem.
Sure. So Typeface began a little more than 4 years ago, and initially it was helping marketers create content using Gen AI for personalized experiences. But over the course of the last 4 years, we've now moved into a place where we are one of the few providers of what we call as the marketing orchestration engine. And the reason I decided to join Typeface was because through my work at Adobe and a few other places, I had seen how marketing organizations had ended up in silos because of the nature of technology. So you had different channel teams being separated from each other because there was a separate email system, a web system, and so on. And really the biggest opportunity I could see from the use of Gen AI was to help orchestrate all of these at scale. And when I dug in further into what Typeface was doing and the vision forward, that's what got me really excited, because I thought Typeface was uniquely positioned to be able to help enterprises move from just content creation through the use of AI to the actual orchestration of everything around content, which is actually the bigger challenge for most of the customers or most of the enterprises today.
Interesting. So when you talk about content orchestration and the disparate nature of channels and all the different places that content needs to go and needs to be personalized, there's lots of different ways that, you know, consumers interface with brands through the written word, through video, through voice, through social. So can you tell me a little bit about what would a campaign look like on Typeface? Where does the content engine do you ingest brand guidelines and brand voice and learn about how a brand speaks to its customers and then help customize for all these channels? Tell me a little bit about the brass tacks, if you wouldn't, so to speak.
Sure thing. So I think one of the biggest things that is an advantage for customers who use Typeface is that we are multimodal in nature and multi-channel. So let me break down what that means. So we are not just focused on creating copy or creating images or creating video. We help customers do all of those, because that's typically what a modern enterprise needs across the different channels for their campaigns. And at the same time, we enable customers to use all of the leading AI models that are out there. So we integrate with all the leading ones, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic models and Google's models, etc. So, and if customers choose to have their own models, we also have a bring your own model scenario that is feasible. Like I said a couple of minutes ago, the real challenge for many enterprises is not content generation using these models anymore, but what happens once you create the content. So what Typeface really allows customers to do is not just generate the content, but actually be able to carry out all of the processes around it, which includes things like the reviews, the workflows, approvals, the integrations into all the different other systems that stay within the marketing landscape, for marketing tech landscape for most of these customers. So if you really break it down, there is the content creation layer. Then there are the very specific marketing domain specialized agents that come into play. So whether it's for email or web or social ads, etc. And then there's the third part, which is the integration into various systems, both from a source perspective. So we enable customers to integrate with, let's say, their digital asset management systems to pull in content. And downstream, we integrate with the publishing channel. So whether it is Salesforce Marketing Cloud for, let's say, emails, or whether it's with web content management systems, or even the social channels for posting ads, we integrate with those. So that way, customers it's not just about sort of playing around in a little sandbox and doing pilots, but they can move to sort of the production usage of AI generated content across multi-channel campaigns. And that's really what I mean by orchestration, because the gnarly problem for enterprises today is not so much anymore just generating the content. It is how, once you have the content in place, how do you actually bring it and have a seamless sort of motion or set of processes to take it from review approval to publishing, and then being able to track the performance back.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and just to round that off,
yeah, please.
As an example, recently I was talking to one of our customers who said that for the last 20 years, their teams had been carrying out what was supposed to be omni-channel campaigns, so across email, web, and social channels. And the CMO mentioned that until now, all of these channel teams were isolated from each other simply because of the technology. And every time they would release a omni-channel campaign, they would all be crossing their fingers, hoping that the content was consistent and that the messaging was consistent across the different audiences. And they were just literally flying by the seat of their pants and hoping that it was actually all consistent and personalized across these channels. And that's exactly the kind of problem that Typeface helps solve, because now all of these different teams can collaborate together in a single place look at all the content, get sort of, uniform reviews and approvals across all the channels, and then publish them out.
Interesting. So where does a marketer start? Do you start with a prompt? Do you start with a source document like a white paper or a blog post? Could you potentially put in a podcast and get the transcript and have that be the starting point for customization in all these different channels? Where's the starting point?
It's a great question. It really depends on the use cases that the marketers are interested in. There are those who have sort of more of the traditional campaign briefs, and they want to use then the brief to sort of attach it as grounding content within a prompt and create the content, help assemble, and then do the review process and publish it out. And then there are those who are looking at things like, publishing blogs or publishing, let's say, sizzle reel videos from long form content that they've already generated. So very recently, a customer of ours had thousands of videos from one of their annual conferences, and they pulled everything together into Typeface, and then were able to create sizzle reel videos, so shorter snippets that they publish onto their website in order to, both have engagement around the event that just happened, as well as garner interest for the next event that is coming up. So it depends on the use case. And one of the interesting things we are seeing now is we are going further upstream in terms of helping customers not just take a brief and sort of start using it in the prompt, but also helping create more intelligent briefs by bringing in more context. So it's, instead of them sort of creating briefs the old-fashioned way, so to speak, we are now starting to help customers create these briefs by actually pulling together context from their market, the industry, the competitive environment, the pricing pressures, the audiences, and so on, so that the briefs that are created are much more intelligent. And therefore, when we talk about personalized content in the right context and the right channels, that brief is the starting point. So it really depends on the use cases that marketers are interested in, but we allow for sort of multiple ways for a marketer to make an entry into this entire workflow.
That's interesting. So you're actually doing the listening and the data collection side of things on the front end of the brief process. So helping ask what question they're trying to solve and then interfacing it as many inputs as you can to make sure that brief actually is not being created in a vacuum. It's being created based on data points. Oh, that's pretty interesting. All right. Well, it's been a hot week for AI. I feel like while I have an AI expert on the horn, I would be missed an opportunity. I wonder if you have a point of view on the quick rollout of Anthropic's newest model that kind of came out and was put behind the wall by the government within a week. Do you have any context to those who aren't AI experts? What was it that the government found so dangerous about this particular model that they wanted to, put it behind closed doors? Or do you have maybe just a hot take on, this week's news around Anthropic's model being kind of released and then taken back in pretty short order?
I might be a quote unquote expert in certain parts of AI, but I'm definitely not an expert in this area. So I'm probably going to take a pass on that one, Dylan.
Yeah, that's okay. No problem. All right. So, over the last 2 years, corporate marketing departments have moved out of kind of the wow factor phase of AI experimentation. Brands are getting through the legal constraints and starting to move into operational teams like the chief compliance officer, creative officer, brand officer, et cetera. What have you seen as the biggest operational roadblocks that enterprise brands hit when they try and move into AI from an isolated playground into a core daily production pipeline and part of their workflows?
Yep. And that's exactly what I mentioned earlier around the fact that it's, the first sort of shiny toy for many of these folks was being able to create content through AI models. But the next step is really then how do you make this usable in a real life scenario, and how do you scale the use of AI? And that's really where the market is at right now. If I look at sort of a swathe of customers and prospects that we're interacting with on a daily basis, most of them are faced with the challenge of how do you go about scaling the use of AI across these marketing workflows. Because as you know very well, it's not just about the content being created. Once you have that, how do you go about carrying out all the processes around governance? How do you ensure the brand rules are adhered to? How do you ensure that the right, set of eyes are doing the human in the loop interactions? And that's a lot of this work is where AI can further help. And the enterprises that are successful are the ones who are thinking through what the impact is to their current processes, the way they did things in sort of the pre-AI mode versus how the processes need to adapt in order to allow for the introduction of AI, not just for content creation, but for the rest of the steps. That's one important aspect of thinking that and planning that most enterprises that are successful in the use of AI are doing. The second important part is also around how people's roles are changing,
Hmm.
right? So it's no longer just about, okay, we have the creative and marketing teams, sending things across to an agency, waiting for the agency's inputs, doing a review, approving or rejecting, and then going back and forth. A lot of this work is now being brought in-house, and therefore both the creative and marketing teams, their roles are changing in terms of them having to be much more hands-on with a lot of these processes. And that's why they need a system that can help orchestrate all of this together. So if you actually summarize if I summarize what I just said over the last few minutes, is back to the old chestnut of the three dimensions of change that need to be managed. One is the technology, but that's not the one that most companies that are successful lead with. It's actually thinking through the people, the processes, and then the technology.
During your tenure at Adobe, you helped drive the enterprise strategy behind Firefly, which took a strict stance on copyright safety and legal indemnification and commercial output. One of the big criticisms right now in the generative space is that these LLMs are investing lots of money in compute. They're buying data centers. They're even investing in power creation to power them, but a lot of times they are not paying for the content in which the models are trained. How do you think publishers and kind of the source code, if you will, for a lot of the ways that these LLMs are trained, are out there, working with, essentially looking at content libraries and scraping the open web, but not necessarily compensating the IP holders for it. Wonder if you had a point of view on that.
Yeah, I think from a typeface perspective, we interact with and use models that already have an increasing amount of such safety for the creatives built in. So the leading models are typically not just sort of scraping artistic work and creative work and getting the models trained further. That part of the market is definitely maturing more. I think the other important thing is also when we have a concept of a brand kit that is set up, and that allows for creative and marketing teams to set the right guardrails in place. So, for example, we have safety checks that can be enabled to ensure that things like competitors' logos should not be used within the content that's generated and used within typeface campaigns. So that's just one example of the variety of safety checks that we have built into the platform so that we enable our customers to make judicious use of the content that is being generated from these AI models.
So enterprise brands spend sometimes decades protecting their distinct visual styles and editorial voices, whether it's color, logo, typeface. How does typeface? It's funny, no pun intended there, but I just caught myself. How does typeface ensure that when an AI agent generates copy or assets at scale, it's able to strictly adhere to a brand's unique style guide without hallucinations or creative drifting?
Yeah, great question. And that's actually, even though I mentioned earlier that content generation is sort of not the biggest challenge anymore, the fact is for creative teams to be comfortable with, especially allowing their marketing colleagues to sort of take over and do a lot of these things on their own, they want to ensure that the creative brand language and brand voice, etc., everything you mentioned is still protected. And that lies at the heart of what we have within our system known as the arc graph, which is the brand kit setup. That is what is a significant amount of the effort or time that we spend initially in deploying typeface with an enterprise is spent on making sure that we set it up and have iterative processes back with the customer to make sure that the quality of the content is meeting their standards, right? So it's not just about how creative is the copy that is being produced, but does it adhere to their brand guidelines, to their requirements, to their standards? So that we have creative technologists in my team that actually work with the customers in order to ensure that those guidelines or those rules, etc., are dialed in to so that from then on, once it's dialed in, the customer signed off, then they don't need to keep worrying about that on it for every campaign or every piece of new content that's generated. So that brand kit is a critical part of the adherence to the brand rules that we set up. And that's actually honestly one of the main differences when we talk to customers, especially in enterprises. Obviously, a lot of them have direct access to these models, right? So you could go to Claude or you could go to OpenAI and generate content. Nothing stopping them from doing that. The biggest challenge then comes in on how does the CMO ensure that their team is adhering to all these brand guidelines when going directly to those models. So while we use the same models, the biggest difference on that part of the chain, the supply chain, is really the fact that we have the brand kit as a central governance unit.
Are most brands in a place where they have those established brand kits, and are those ingestible very easily, or do your creative teams need to work with the customer in order to get specific assets and specific training materials in order to kind of configure their instance, for a lack of understanding the exact terminology?
That's a great question. So we actually help guide our customers in terms of what kind of content we need from them to help set up the brand kit. But on the other hand, we are also the platform is powerful enough to take in content of any kind. So there are customers who give us PDFs. There are other customers who point us to their SharePoint folders and so on. So we have the ability to ingest content from a variety of different sources. What we do guide them on is what kind of content do we want, right? So give us samples of this kind of content, or the emails. Give us like 10 email samples so that we know what good looks for you from an email perspective, as an example. So I would say that maturity varies widely between different enterprises, but that doesn't really matter because every one of them has these fundamental set of guidelines in one shape or the other. And we don't make them go through hoops to convert that into something that we can read. We actually take whatever formats they have, and then our platform actually converts them into this brand kit structure. The bigger
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add on to that.
Mm-hmm.
So the time that is spent is not so much on the ingestion, and then we have models that extract the rules and so on. The time we spend typically with customers, and this is an iterative process, is on making sure we dial the quality to what their expectations are.
Do you have a feedback loop with content generation based on results? So if you send an email that has a better open rate, or a longer read time, or a longer completion rate, or if you generate a piece of social media content or an ad that performs well in organic social, does the system get smarter based on how content is performing in the wild, so to speak, and feedback signals to the platform, so you can not only adhere to brand guidelines but actually create content that moves the needle?
Great question, and something I get asked 10 times a day. And so this is something that we announced a few weeks ago around the Arc Loop capability that we are about to release in the near future. And that's exactly, so we're already working with a couple of pilot customers on that capability, and that's exactly closing the feedback loop so that once a campaign is out in the wild, we have the ability to collect the measurements, the metrics, and be able to use that to create this virtuous flywheel, which goes back in and says, are the audience definitions dialed in correctly? Which content work well for which audience or which segment? And then based on that, for similar campaigns in the future, focus on assets of that type versus the ones that did not perform, and so on. So that's exactly what we are going to release with the Arc Loop capability.
Are you mainly set up for B2B? I know based on your career, it's a lot of B2B execution, and some of the language that we've been talking about is around B2B. But are you guys primarily focused on B2B, or do you also do work with B2C clients?
No, we have customers in the retail world, in consumer products, in consumer banking. So, and at the same time, we have customers who are in the B2B world as well. So, we don't have any particular proclivity towards either B2B or B2C.
Interesting. You've had a career working with dominant content management systems like Contentful and SAP. Why is it more effective to embed AI natively inside of an enterprise's existing tools? Plug into their Salesforce, their Google, their Microsoft APIs, rather than forcing creative teams to kind of log into a standalone situation. Why is it important for to be able to meet a enterprise customer where they are and not be completely disruptive to the stack that they already have in place?
Yeah, great. Very, very good question. So actually, there are two different angles here. Firstly, customers who are using Typeface successfully are not using it in a standalone manner, right? I think
Interesting. Yeah.
that's one important point. That's why I mentioned earlier that the integration into their MarTech landscape is one of the key things that we enable through our extensibility features, whether it's more sort of APIs, which many customers are familiar with, or MCP endpoints, etc. So we have a different set of capabilities available, which my team helps customers in sort of preparing that integration landscape and enabling the integrations. Because if it's standalone, then it's not the entire ingesting of content from dams and so on, and then the publishing downstream into the channels like emails, etc., would not be possible. So that's the first thing. Secondly, to your point, we also don't necessarily force customers or users to come into our platform through these capabilities I mentioned. We have, for example, a very, very well-known banking customer who has completely used us in a headless manner, right? So they have their own app layer that they created in order to sort of bring in AI-driven workflows, and their users never get into Typeface's UX. But they're using all of the capabilities in a headless manner through APIs and MCP endpoints. So that's the second point. Going back to your first question around why is it not easy enough to put in, inject AI into more sort of systems that users are familiar with, I think that comes down to what I said earlier. It's not just about the introduction of new technology, it's about how the workflows change because of the introduction of technology, right? So if you look at some of the systems that have been around for a few years, the flows there are deeply sort of embedded within how the system has been architected. So sure, you can add AI into there at certain points in the journey, but if you have to go into a completely agentic workflow, as an example, that's not very easy. If you think about it from a technical architecture, that requires a considerable amount of rebuilding of those platforms. And as you know, that's not easy for companies who have thousands of customers in the install base. And that's the reason why you don't see that all the incumbents are necessarily successful in just injecting AI into their architectures of Europe.
Interesting. As AI systems are moving to assistive tools to autonomous agentic workflows that can write, test, place their own ads, where do you think a company should draw the line? Where does the human creative director still need to be in the loop, so to speak? And especially as you mentioned, enterprises are clawing back some of these capabilities from agencies and bringing them in-house. Where is the human in the loop an important component of the process?
We firmly believe that creatives still need to own the core ideation, right? So the ideation aspect, the creation of the key art, for example, still very firmly belongs to the humans in the creative teams. Where AI really comes into play from a creative team's perspective is not so much in the generation of like the hero assets or the key art, but it's actually in the ability to automate things that a lot of the creative teams spend a lot of time on, such as resizing, right? So this is a classic example where you produce an asset or an image, let's say in a certain dimension, and then you have to resize it 20 times across to accommodate for the requirements from different channels. And what many creatives used to do in the past was spend their precious time actually doing that kind of work, which they didn't like to do anyway.
Yeah,
Right? But
busy
that fell
work,
on
so to
them.
speak.
Right. But so is that scaled production aspect of it, which is where AI comes into play. We still firm with, and every customer I talk to, always when we sort of talk about how these workflows need to be put in place, the creatives are still very much in charge of the initial sort of seed content. That's number one. The second part of it is also, even when it moves to marketers in terms of the content supply chain, we still believe that we need to have the right sort of checkpoints, the pair of human eyes, and that's the human in the loop concept. So we have collaboration and workflow capabilities in our system, but more importantly, we can engage or we can connect to the end-to-end workflow systems that customers already have in place, so that things like approvals and reviews can still be carried out by humans. So I don't, much as a lot of companies talk about completely automated, personalization and so on, I don't believe that there are too many enterprises that are ready to have everything go from 0 to 100 without any human review.
Yeah, makes sense. Or you end up with somebody with 6 fingers or something like that in the picture or
Exactly
something,
right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Leading customer success organization for a standard enterprise software product is hard enough. How do you structure a customer success team when the underlying core product, generative AI, is evolving at a breakneck pace, literally every month? How does your team keep up with the innovations that you guys are deploying week to week?
Yeah, it makes for very exciting lives for my team members and me. We have to be constantly on the, quote unquote, leading edge to make sure we understand what's happening in the market and advise our customers or help them with understanding those changes. Essentially, if you look at the way we are handling customer success here, Dylan, for Typeface, there are three sort of main aspects that I focus on. One is sort of the business success. How do we ensure that our customers see the business value from their adoption of Typeface? So we have the engagement managers, who are a combination of the traditional project manager and customer success manager roles. So these are the folks who have domain experience, many years of working together with enterprises, either within marketing and creative teams or within agencies, who work with our customers to help them with everything from change management to tactical project execution, project tracking, and so on until they go live, and then continue to work with them to help drive usage and adoption and expand into other use cases. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of the team is around the technical success, because it's all good to have an engagement manager driving this towards business impact, but the business impact cannot be realized until the technical deployment is done correctly. And that's why we have solution architects and forward deployed engineers who work with customers to help build out the integrations, the connectors, custom agents, because increasingly we are seeing IT teams start to get more involved in this end-to-end chaining. And so we have now also enabled our Forge, which allows for IT teams to build out custom agents. That's the other way in which customers are adapting these agentic workflows to what they want it to be, rather than completely sort of out of the box canned workflows or canned agentic workflows that we provide. So that's the second aspect. So that's where the solution architects and forward deployed engineers come in. And the third aspect, like I said before, content creation is still a part of that whole chain. And there are many enterprises where marketing and creative teams are not quite comfortable in knowing how to work with AI. And so I have a group of creative technologists who help customers with setting up the brand kit, ensuring that we dial in the quality, and also helping work with customers on an ongoing basis if necessary, to help them produce the right kind of content for their campaigns. So those are sort of the three dimensions of customer success that we focus on: the business part of it, the technical aspect, and then the content quality. And that between these three roles, we find that we are able to be sufficient enough to meet the expectations of our enterprise customers.
So many CMOs are under intense pressure from their boards to prove AI investments are actually tracking to dollars in the bottom line. What are the core KPIs that you help your clients track to prove Typeface is driving top line business impact rather than being a shiny new tool?
Yep. That is one of the key things that we focus on when we talk about AI usage at scale for marketing organizations. And, on the bottom line side of the house are the metrics such as reducing the cost of production of campaigns or cost per lead, decreasing the time to market, right? So as an example, one of our, very large banking customers, went from taking 6 weeks to launch a campaign to 6 hours. Right?
Wow.
And this is real, as in like they have measured it, documented it, and they're ready to go public with it. So that's the kind of impact we're talking about. So typically on the bottom line side of the house, it's cost cutting, it's time reduction, and so on. Where it gets even more interesting is then on the top line part, which requires more time because the campaigns need to be published, they need to be baked in for a while. But things like increase in engagement, then further down in terms of, I mean, obviously the state of nirvana around marketing attribution is attributing ARR, but most companies are still not quite there. But they do have the ability to track how. So some of our customers have started tracking how this starts impacting the top line metrics as well. So we work with every enterprise customer of ours. When we start these projects, we are always aligned with them on what aspects of business impact they want to see.
Now that generating copy and images has become practically free and instant, are we in danger of completely overloading consumers with digital noise? How can brands use personalization to create better experiences rather than just more content?
Yeah, and that's exactly why I think one of the opportunities with the judicious use of AI in enterprises is being able to truly personalize. I mean, like I said, I was responsible for building a personalization platform in one of my earlier roles, and much as we, push the boundaries on a lot of different things, AI in its current form didn't exist then. And there were, limits to what humans could do in terms of, for example, creating variants for different audiences or micro segments, micro audiences. Whereas today, all of that is now feasible and can be done very quickly. Having said that, I think a number of our enterprise customers are now really, really focused on making sure that they personalize, and that's where the taste comes in. It cannot just be AI slop that is sent across to all of the different audiences. And that's where the enterprises who are judicious about how they use AI, what parts of it, that's why things like the brand kit and the checks and compliance reviews, all of that is important to make sure they're not just putting out a whole bunch of, irrelevant content to their audiences. And but the real opportunity, which is what we see customers embracing now, is the fact that AI makes it possible to scale the personalization, which was not possible earlier.
So, looking down the line into the future, how do you think the day-to-day job of a junior copywriter or a graphic designer at a top-tier creative agency or within an in-house marketing agency or brand team will look fundamentally different thanks to content orchestration engines?
What we've already started seeing, and I think this will just accelerate in the future, is the concept of creative technologists, right? Folks who have both the training, the experience, the taste, the eye for being either designers or copywriters, but also who are well versed with the use of AI technology. Because that's when this becomes a very powerful combination where they can then actually figure out how to accelerate and scale their efforts instead of everything having to be done manually. But at the same time, their taste and their ability, their discretion in figuring out what is good versus what is slop comes into play. So I see increasing convergence between the sort of creative aspect of things for many of these folks and the technology aspects. And we've already seen people who do that. In fact, like I said, I have a team of such folks in my organization.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I think as the next generation of creative strategists and folks are coming out of school and adapting these tools, it's definitely looking for a new resume. A little bit of a creatives need to have that quantitative hat as well, and or really understand how to work within these platforms. So I think it's a pretty exciting time.
Absolutely.
Well, Satya, thanks so much for coming on and spending a little bit of time with us today and telling the audience about Typeface. If folks want to follow along with your thought leadership, or if they want to learn more about Typeface, where would you like to send them?
There is the Typeface website. There's a Typeface blog. We also publish a lot of our articles and insights, ideas, etc. on LinkedIn. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me directly, I'm at satya@typeface.ai. So feel free to reach out to me as well if there's something that you want to sort of directly interact with me on. But otherwise, we are present on a number of the channels as well as on our own website. But thank you for having me today, Dylan. I enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for spending some time with our audience. I appreciate it. And if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening, a honest review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on is how we find a larger audience organically. So don't forget to do that. And if there's a brand marketer out there who's looking to learn how to do marketing orchestration at scale, or learning, wanting to, take some of these AI opportunities from experimentation to actual workflow integration, or maybe someone who you think would just enjoy the conversation that I had with Satya today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I'll wish you a great day. Thanks for spending some time with us today.